Welcome once again to Strange Planet. Thanks for sticking me in your ear. And as you can see, for those of you watching on the YouTube channel, I'm still at my mom's in Brantford. God bless her. She's approaching 98 and she needs some help. And as is often the case, that often falls on the daughters. And so I have two sisters who are absolute angels who have been caring for my mother. So I thought it was time for me to pitch in and give them a little bit of a break. And also, I just enjoy, of course, and treasure and cherish every moment that I get to spend with my mom. So that's why things look a little bit different here in the studio. All right. On this episode, we are going to delve into the Gog of Magog and end times prophecy, but also in light of the fact that we are now just a little more than a year into the current war in Ukraine after Russia invaded in late February of 2021, and how does at the time of the invasion, my guest and I had a conversation about how that might fit into a prophecy contained in the Book of Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39. This conflict that would ultimately lead to the final, the Battle of Armageddon. So now here we are a year later into the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, and let's find out if things perhaps have shifted, changed, and where we're at in terms of the second coming. Ali Siadatan is with us. He is the founder of Think Again Productions. It's a multimedia teaching ministry shedding light on mysteries and treasures of scriptural knowledge, which is making the Bible more real than ever. In 2006, Ali and Think Again Productions released his groundbreaking documentary, UFOs, Angels, and Gods. And it's a great pleasure to welcome Ali back. Ali, how are you?
I'm very good. Thank you, Richard, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you and to jump into this fascinating topic and kind of seeing where it's going to take us. You know, when prophecy starts to take shape on the stage of world history, it's pretty amazing.
It certainly does feel like we are entering into end times. But before all of that, because this actually um, is very timely, you are planning a trip to the Holy Land, to Israel, towards the end of 2023. So many of the things that we're talking about, people can sign on to this trip, go to Israel, and visit some of the places that we're going to be talking about tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like walking into the pages of the Bible, into the fulfillment of prophecy. You know, you're walking there into it as prophecy is being fulfilled. And there's so much that has been dug up archaeologically that makes the Bible real. At the end of the day, I find that when you're there, you enter into a deep devotion, a communion with God, because you're touched by what you're seeing and how it brings the Bible to life for your consciousness, and suddenly the heart opens up in a way that it can't, other places, and it becomes a very spiritual moment. It's energizing, it's educational, it's entertaining. Yeah, it's the first week of December. If people want to go, just email me
All right. And how do they email you?
through the website thinkagainproductions.com.
All right. And there's an itinerary and everything available there on the website.
Well, no, that's being put up, but that's why if they email me, I can send it to them.
Terrific. All right. I'm hoping to go, just to let people know if that if
I'm
that
rooting for you. I'm rooting for you.
yes, if that persuades anyone, I'm going to try and move heaven and earth so that I can join you there. And I must say, who better to I can't think of anything or anyone rather. I'd rather go and see these places with and see the history unfold and the Bible unfold than you, Ali.
Thank you. Thank you.
So speaking of Israel, Israel obviously is central to everything that unfolds in the Bible, and one of the most important prophecies that ultimately, I guess, sets the countdown clock ticking is towards end times and the second coming is the regathering which when you think about it, an impossible thing to even fathom. That this forgotten language would be rediscovered, Hebrew, that the Jews that had been scattered to the winds would come back and regather and reform a country, and yet it happened.
Absolutely. It's miraculous in itself. At first, it was in the hands of the Romans, who destroyed the Second Temple in 70 AD and took over Jerusalem and scattered the Jewish people into the Roman Empire. And then it fell to the caliphates of Islam and eventually into the hands of the British Empire. So it really changed a lot of hands because Jewish people scattered and divided, they could have been lost and just melted away into the world. It's a fascinating story. When you look at the prophetic vision of the prophets of the Bible, they paint essentially a picture for us of events on the stage of world history. And as you start to look at these events, you realize, well, it implies that there's a national presence of the Jewish people in that land because it happens in that land. This is where the epicenter of the prophecies of the Bible take us. There's a million and one things that are happening in the rest of the world, but the Bible would have to be, a million volumes long, and we could never understand it if God were to tell us when you see all of these things happen at once. So the Bible really focuses on a character, like every movie has a character you follow, but that character is part of a larger world that's happening, unfolding all around him. And the character we follow is Israel. And so suddenly we receive how the prophets take us into this land and take us into the city of Jerusalem, meaning that until Jerusalem were to become again part of the Jewish Commonwealth, these prophecies wouldn't even make sense. They could not happen literally. And that's why for thousands of years, Christians got accustomed to thinking of all of these prophecies as allegorical, symbolic. They're not really talking anymore about the world in which we live, or in Israel returning, or events on the stage of history. They talk about a spiritual war. They speak of another world, and well, Israel, rejected Christ, and therefore, they don't really have an importance anyways in this story. However, suddenly everything turns around. They do return, and these prophecies suddenly fall into place. And what the prophets said, now we're seeing it happen before our eyes. We can take it literally. And of course, it's impossible to not be really interested in weighing, could this be true? Could it all be happening on the stage of history as the prophets intended in their writings?
What is interesting about Jerusalem is that even though the First World War, the Great War, and the Second World War weren't necessarily focused on the Holy Land. We think of the Great War and the Second War, although in the Second War there was a Pacific theater, we think of it as sort of a European war. And yet, the First World War had tremendous importance in Jerusalem that also kind of moved that clock, that countdown clock I was talking about, forward, because in the result of the First World War was to free in 1917 to free Jerusalem from the Caliphate, and then of course then we had the Second World War with the many Jews fleeing Germany, returning to the Holy Land, and of course at the end of the Second World War, the formation of the modern state of Israel. So even though those first two wars really, in many ways, had nothing to do with the Middle East, although there were some skirmishes there, again, they moved the clock forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I like your analogy of a clock. If you see the nations connected together like the inner workings of a clock, and the seasons of the ages of empire and history move according to the timing of God, it seems that these two world wars, you're right, the First World War was used to bring the land out of the hand of the Caliphate. The Second World War, after the Holocaust, the League of Nations got together, and there was a section that was discussing Israel and the Middle East, and eventually it was decided in November of 1947, that yes, the British mandate would end and there would be a new country born overnight, as the prophets had suggested, like Isaiah, that overnight, literally, there would be the born again nation. And that's what happened. And they took it in 1948. And it's interesting. Eventually, the Bible talks about a third world war, to be honest, it seems to me. And so I could say that this entire story is the story of 3 world wars. The first one brings them into the out of the land is freed. In the second one, the people return. In the third one, the Messiah arrives and brings peace to the world. And so it's three world wars that are used to move us forward. These are the birth pangs, I would say, of this age of history, giving birth to the Messianic kingdom, to the utopia that the Bible's prophets talk about.
So a third world war, once again, then the city of Jerusalem will be a focal point.
Yes.
And I guess we should discuss now, in what way, how will that play out? How will Jerusalem become the focal point of a third world war?
Well, there is a passage given to us in the book of Zechariah, and it's in Zechariah chapter 14. It says that all nations, God says, I'll gather all nations against Jerusalem. And then let me just look for it. I hadn't marked it up, but it is an interesting passage. I think it ties, oh, here we go. It ties into what we're going to talk about tonight, which is another one of these conflicts that are painted for us. But I would say that as far as the final moment of history, perhaps there is no better book that captures it than Zechariah chapter 14, that goes ahead and it kind of gives us this painting of the nations gathering against Israel, against Jerusalem specifically. And behold, the day of the Lord of Adonai is coming, when your plunder will be divided in your midst. I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to wage war. And then it says here, then Adonai, the Lord, will go forth and fight against those nations as he fights in the day of battle. In that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which lies to the east of Jerusalem. And for those who may join us and come to Jerusalem, we will go to the Mount of Olives. And that is where, Jesus ascended from. He left the earth, it says in the book of Acts, from the Mount of Olives. And the angel said, that he'll return in the same way that he left. And it looks like he will return in the same place he left as well, because it says that God will descend to the Mount of Olives. And it says that the mountain will be split in two from east to west, forming a huge valley. And it's interesting because there's a fault line, a very important fault line that goes from Jerusalem to Kenya. And so this does describe an earthquake, gives a precedent. And what's interesting is that it continues to say that the Lord will go to battle against all of these enemies that have arrived. And this ties into many other passages that paint the picture of a great war against Jerusalem as the nations gather. However, in this case, once the battle is done, it says, then all the survivors from all the nations that attacked Jerusalem, the survivors from all the nations that attacked Jerusalem, will go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, which is our heaven's armies, and to celebrate Sukkot, which is the 7th of the appointed days, the Feast of Tabernacle. So it says that all those who survive will go to Jerusalem. So there is a world after this moment. When we think of the end of the world, we always think in the world in our culture, but in the Bible, it's simply a transition of ages, from the age of empire to the kingdom of the Messiah, an age of peace and utopia, the Sabbath history. And there, all the nations will have to send ambassadors to Jerusalem on the Feast of Sukkot. And of course, the nations in the Bible are seen as clans and tribes, families. The Bible doesn't see the world in the context of nation states, which is our own creation, our own political creation. So that's where we're headed. Ultimately, this third war, it comes together eventually. Somehow, we don't know exactly why and how. At this point, Jerusalem becomes very central to it, and as all these nations gather against it, the Messiah arrives and brings out a new age of history. So that's the last moment of this age of history, the way that Zechariah paints it for us.
So it sounds like you're saying then that World War III will be the Battle of Armageddon?
That's another passage. So there are many passages that talk about it. In another passage, we give the name of this valley in north, 35 miles north of Jerusalem, where apparently the armies will gather. And I suspect that Armageddon is code also for a spiritual battle. Like, it's not just a physical place; it's the name of the last spiritual cosmic conflict. It is the climax of a cosmic conflict. But yet there is a place also on Earth called Armageddon, the valley, which I imagine will be used. And as Israel is a land bridge between Asia, Africa, and Europe, some of the most ancient battles of history were fought in that valley of Armageddon, starting with the pharaohs of Egypt, as different empires have come from different directions. Ironically, that valley has been, from the beginning of history, a place of incredible battle between empires, and it seems that it's also reserved for the Battle of Battles. Each one of these prophetic writings gives us a piece of the puzzle of what that final conflict will look. One gives the name of the place, the other gives the idea the Messiah will arrive on a Mount of Olives, push them away, and usher in a new kingdom that will require ambassadors to come. Another will talk about the kings of the earth and the leaders of the nations conspiring and following this guy who is their king, into all of this. So they're like pieces of the puzzle that come together, even though they were uttered by different prophets living in different centuries, written in different books. Together they form a cohesive picture that perhaps points to divine authorship, that there was a common mind behind this book.
All right, Ali, we'll take a quick time out. When we come back, we'll get into Ezekiel 38, 39, the Battle of Gog and Magog, Armageddon, World War III. Are we talking about the same thing? We'll find out back in a few minutes. Stay with us.
What would it feel like to reclaim your health, your vitality, to sleep deeply, to live fully, to address health at the root, at the cellular level, so that your body can detect damage where you have it? Imagine living younger, longer, having the energy to do what you want to do when you want to do it. Discomfort fading away. ASEA Redox Supplement harnesses the power of your body to heal itself, giving you the ability to power your potential. This is one of the most profound health, athletic, and anti-aging discoveries of our lifetime, and we need the world to know about it. If you want to learn more about ASEA, visit strangeplanet.teamasea.com, strangeplanet.teamasea.com, and be sure to text or call my colleague and friend Lynn at 443-254-6024, 443-254-6024 to order or for additional information. ASEA Redox Supplement. It's truly wellness redefined.
And we are back with Ali Siadatan from Think Again Productions. And again, a big trip coming to Israel, a big trip heading to Israel the first week of December.
Yes.
And people can get more information. Just go to thinkagainproductions.com and you can contact Ali through the website. And he'll send you the itinerary. I've seen it. It's absolutely mind-blowing. I'm hoping to go. It's not 100% certain, but if that, for all of you listening, if that can be the deal maker, I suppose, I'd love to be along and see you there as well. So again, thinkagainproductions.com. So Ali, Ezekiel 38, 39, talking about a battle again in Armageddon, which, as you mentioned, has been the location of many battles throughout the history of ancient Israel. What is to suggest that the one that is being described in Ezekiel 38, 39 hasn't already happened?
In chapter 38, verse 16, it says, "It will happen in the last days. I will bring against my land so that the nations may know when I am sanctified through you, Gog, before their eyes, it gives us the period of history in which will happen. Now, the last days is a technical word in the Bible, because the Bible, like the Mayan calendar, divides the world into ages of history. And so this was a common thing in the ancient world. There are ages of history. And even the metals that were used to sometimes talk about the ages of history, going from pure metals to less pure, there's a degrading. So the ages of history, there was one called the last days. It's one of the ages of biblical history. Acharit Hayamim. It's mentioned by Jacob for the first time to his sons in Genesis chapter 49. It's mentioned by Ezekiel, by Daniel in Daniel chapter 12, when he says, the angel says to Daniel, this prophecy is for the last days. And then in the New Testament, Peter gets up on the day of Pentecost, Shavuot, one of the appointed days of God's law, of God's Torah, and he says, he quotes a prophecy from Joel about the last days. And he then seems to declare that day in Jerusalem on Pentecost, that day, that age of history began. And so we entered the last days 2,000 years ago. What is it? It is the transitional age between the age of empire and the Messianic kingdom. The Messiah has come, he has been resurrected, he has gone to the Father, he has received the scepter of rule over the whole of creation. We have effectively entered into a new age, the Messianic age, and that's why the power of the fallen angels, the gods, was reduced on the earth, and God's Spirit was sent to the nations, and people woke up again to fellowship with the living God. But then the Messianic kingdom hasn't fully arrived, and this age of transition between the end of the age of empire and the beginning of the Messianic kingdom is the last days. And now we see that it has actually lasted 2,000 years. So we are told that this battle will somehow happen in this age of history of all the biblical ages, the one that Peter said we have just entered into. Except shortly after Peter's words, the Jewish people were kicked out of Israel, scattered. Jerusalem was taken, the temple was destroyed. Never have we seen this battle occur in the past 2,000 years in the last days. Suddenly, when Israel becomes a nation again, in just 2 chapters before, chapter 36 and 37, are really about Israel becoming a nation again and coming back to this land. And then the very next chapter tells the story of this war that is put in this stage of history, and this has never happened to Israel. So it's conceivable to think that it's going to happen this time around when they're back, especially since we see so many of the clues starting to align.
But the conflict that is described in the scroll of Ezekiel, is it separate from Armageddon? Do you think?
There's a debate about that. So some people see it as this is another window, another puzzle picture into the same piece. The pieces of this one final conflict where the Messiah appears is scattered in all these prophetic writings, and this is another one of the pieces of that puzzle. Others believe that it could be a separate war, and that's where I lean. I think it's different from the War of Armageddon. I think that the Bible's prophecies pattern, not like the Greek mind where everything has a single linear fulfillment, and the Hebrew prophetic poetry is designed in a spiral form of pattern, where a template has been put forward, and it has multiple fulfillments until it has a climactic fulfillment. So I think that the climactic fulfillment of all these battles that we see, whether it's David and Goliath, which is, for instance, an image of the son of David, the Messiah, and perhaps the seed of the serpent, the final Nephilim like Goliath. All of these battles we see, all of these things perhaps are echoes, are patterns of the climactic moment where the full redemption of the earth comes, because this is what this is all about. It's about God coming and healing the earth and redeeming the earth. It's what began on the cross ends on the valleys of Armageddon, if you will, and it finally results into the full healing, restoration, and redemption of the human race, and a beautiful age of peace arrives. But there are so many clues given in this particular scroll that I think differentiate it from Armageddon. I'll point a few out. With Armageddon, we really get a feeling that all the nations are coming. Here we have a specific list of nations, and I see that the Semites are completely missing as the way the Bible divides the world between these families and clans, the sons of Noah, Japheth, Shem, Ham, Japheth. And here we don't see any of the sons of Shem. In fact, they're on the sidelines watching the Siaditan and the merchants of Tarshish with all its young lions will say to you, have you come to see spoil? Have you assembled your company to plunder, to carry away silver and gold, to take away livestock and property, to make off with immense spoils? They're watching this horde arrive, and they have been engaged inquisitively, like, what's this all about? And so it's interesting, it's not all the nations. Then it says that once Israel wins, it says the inhabitants of Israel's cities will go out and kindle fires with the weapons, shields and breastplates, bows and arrows and war clubs and spears. They will make fires with them for 7 years. So they're going to use the weapons as a source of fuel. Now, it's interesting that, Russian nuclear technology has a 7-year lifespan. Is it connected to that? I don't know, but we definitely can turn nuclear things into energy, right? We I don't know how a physicist would use this technology to turn into electricity, but this doesn't sound to me like Jesus' messianic kingdom, where for 7 years weapons are used as a source of fuel.
But it sounded like you mentioned Israel. It sounded as if Israel will join in at some point, even though they're not. You said when Israel wins?
It says yes. After Israel wins, it's the inhabitants of Israel's cities will go out and kindle fires with the weapons, shield, breastplates, bows, arrows, war clubs, and
Right.
spears.
So it seems to be saying Israel is not involved in the beginning, but will ultimately be involved in this conflict. Do I have that right?
Well, these countries are launching a massive assault against Israel. They're marching from the north, coming to it, and they're defeated on the hills and mountains as they get closer to the land. And then once they're defeated, Israel is also going to take their weapons, use them as a source of fuel for 7 years, it says.
Right.
And it's like, okay, well, if Jesus has already come and he started his kingdom on the earth, and then I don't think that Israel would be, burning, these weapons as a source of energy. And then it says that once the multitude is, defeated even miraculously by God, it says the house of Israel will bury them for 7 months in order to cleanse the land. And again, I don't see this as something that would happen in the kingdom of Christ, of the Messiah, that for 7 months people would be burying other people. All the people of the land will bury them, and it will be memorable for them. A day when I'm glorified, it is a declaration of Adonai. Men will be continuously set apart to travel through the land and bury the travelers remaining on the face of the land in order to cleanse it. At the end of 7 months, they will make their search. When they travel through the land, if any sees a man's bones, he will set up a sign by it until the buriers have buried it in the valley of Gog. Hamona will also be the name of the city, so they will cleanse the land. So you're going to bury them for 7 months. Then you're going to take special people with specialty, and they walk around looking. If you see a person, a bone, you're not supposed to touch it. Maybe it's radioactive. And then you call one of these specialists to come and bury it. Again, this does not sound to me like the MO of the Messianic kingdom, of Jesus's world. That's why I feel what is described here clearly still is part of our world, of our age, of empire and wars and weapons and burials, and so I think that this is not the same as the War of Armageddon. It has echoes. Eventually, when the War of Armageddon does happen, there are definitely echoes, that a lot of similarities in this idea of patterns that the Bible creates. So it sets certain foundational patterns that will repeat in that war. But I think that it's too many clues are here to me that say this is this thing. The Shemites are not there. Weapons are used as fuel. People are buried for 7 months. Then even after that, specialists have to go and continue to look for bones and bury them. I don't, for me, I don't think this is how Jesus' kingdom is going to operate.
Right, you're right. It doesn't sound like the final battle of good and evil. Let's take another time out. Ali Siadatan, Think Again Productions, thinkagainproductions.com. You can contact him through the website to get details of the trip of a lifetime to Israel, first week of December, when many of the things we're talking about will suddenly come to life. You will visit some of these locations. We'll also tell you about his ongoing course on Revelation. We'll tell you how you can get involved in that as well. Back with more in a moment.
What would it feel like to reclaim your health, your vitality, to sleep deeply, to live fully, to address health at the root, at the cellular level, so that your body can detect damage where you have it? Imagine living younger, longer, having the energy to do what you want to do when you want to do it. Discomfort fading away. ASEA Redox Supplement harnesses the power of your body to heal itself, giving you the ability to power your potential. This is one of the most profound health, athletic, and anti-aging discoveries of our lifetime, and we need the world to know about it. If you want to learn more about ASEA, visit strangeplanet.teamasea.com, strangeplanet.teamasea.com, and be sure to text or call my colleague and friend Lynn at 443-254-6024, 443-254-6024 to order or for additional information. ASEA Redox Supplement. It's truly wellness redefined.
And we are back with Ali Siadatan, Think Again Productions. Ali, how do we sign on to your course on your series on Revelation?
Go to patreon.com/thinkagainproductions, and you will be able to sign up just to my Patreon page, and the chapter by chapter study of the Book of Revelation is being posted there. And you can go to my website, thinkagainproductions.com, and watch documentary I made, and double click on that, go into the YouTube channel. But for the series in Revelation, go to the Patreon account.
And that documentary is UFOs Angels and Gods.
Yes.
All right. So we're talking about this conflict that has been prophesied in Ezekiel 38:39. It
Right.
doesn't sound like we're talking about Armageddon,
I don't think so.
because of the events that follow that you described. Again, it doesn't sound like how the Messianic kingdom would start with, radiation poisoning and so forth. And we've talked about this before when we've discussed this conflict in Ezekiel 38:39. But for those who missed it, let's just get a summary of who is involved in this conflict, and then we can start to see if that matches up to what's starting to take place right now.
Yeah. So it's given a list of tribes, and there's a leader. His name is Gog, and it sounds a very strange name. It's nearly like a Nephilim name. It sounds a lot like Og of Bashan. So there's a leader, Gog, the land of Magog. That's an actual place. The chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. These are tribes. And it says that I'm against you, and it gives a list of allies that come with it. And the allies are Persia, is the first one mentioned, Cush and Put, all of them with shield and helmet, Gomer and all his troops, the house of Togarma from the extreme north and all his troops, many people with you. So we got Togarma, Put, Cush, Persia, Meshech, Tubal, Magog. Who are these? And as you said, we've covered them. And if people go to my YouTube channel, they can see a detailed talk on this, where I show maps and explain, from historical writings, who were these guys. But just to summarize it, now that we want to see where we are in the story with the events a year after this war, it's possible to see the Magogians as the Scythians or the Scythians, which are the ancestors of the people that would live in the northern Uranian plateau, Russia, and in the stands like Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, all the stands of Russia. And so definitely I would say partly Slavic people would identify with that, but it's large tribal group living in northern Uranian plateau into what is modern day Russia and the stands. When it comes to Persia, well, that's the name of Iran until it was 1936 when the king changed it from Persia to Iran. Kush, Put, North Africa, Libya, Tunisia, roughly, but North Africa. And I would put Gomer as part of the lands that are, close to Russia, and Poland, the people, some people of Gomer, and then Togarma as was where the Turks come from. Actually, and when we think of Turkey, we think of Turkey, and that's where the Turks come from. Actually, the Turks don't come from Turkey. They invaded that land 1,000 years ago. That's just 1,000 years ago, and they created this country, Turkey. They come from Turkmenistan, which is another one of the stands of Russia, or used to be. And so Togarma is from there. So again, you really get this northern people. Persia is mentioned, North Africa is mentioned, and the stands are mentioned, Russia is mentioned. That is kind of what seems to be here. And of course, if the Togarma comes and takes over Turkey, then by extension, one could say maybe Turkey is mentioned here as well. So it's more of a northern confederacy. It's a lot of these countries mentioned are Islamic. In fact, all of them are Islamic. Russia has 20% Muslim population. So it's it seems that the non-Arab Islamic world, the first wars against Israel, 1948, 67, 73, they're all by Arabic-speaking Islamic countries immediately around Israel. And there might be other prophecies in the Book of Psalms and other places that talk about those wars. But this seems to be a larger one coming from the non-Islamic Arabic speaking, non-Arabic speaking Islamic nations. And yes, and it may involve Russia, because both in 67 and 73, the Soviets were the industrial patrons. They gave them tanks and guns and ammunition and backing to the nations that attacked Israel. So there's a pattern, in a way, historical recent pattern in the context of this very country, which is here by the fulfillment of prophecy, and these events, has been set. So that's also kind of interesting. And we won't really know until we see it. This is just conjecture. We really are just, exercising our thinking and kind of trying to understand. I wouldn't ever get too obsessed with any particular interpretation until it's all come and done.
Okay, so this conflict that is prophesied, Ezekiel 38, 39, which does not sound like Armageddon, as for reasons that you stated earlier. It does sound like not just a regional war. It looks like it's expanding based on the participants. So it does sound like we're talking about World War III.
I guess so. I guess that this would qualify on a more larger scale. I don't know if the armies of the West or America are involved. I would say that the first war were regional around Israel, the Arab nations. This is the second one. This is a little bit larger. And the third one, the one that is in Zechariah and Psalms 2 and Armageddon, that is definitely like even the armies of the East, the river Euphrates dries, and a huge. So I think there's an expanding, in that sense. We said there's 3 world wars. There's also, it seems, that a larger regional, and a global one. And there's also a 3 here. So definitely this is a much larger war, but is it going to involve the West getting involved? I'm not sure. I don't see that written.
All right.
So it's a bit of a confusing
Okay,
thing.
so maybe not World War III.
And not get involved. Well, we're comfortable here.
All right, so maybe so not World War III. So maybe, in fact, World War III is Armageddon, the final battle. So let's look at what's happening right now. We're a little more than a year into the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We have seen recently an accord of cooperation signed between Belarus and Iran. They just agreed on a whole wide range of trade and culture, and I think military, and of course Belarus is an ally of Russia. Some might say just a puppet, perhaps, of Russia. Russia, of course, has been very cooperative with Iran. Talk to me some more about how maybe some of these accords and alliances are starting to sound a lot like Ezekiel 38-39.
Okay, so if we assume that Gog of Magog, Meshech, Tubal, this is essentially the heartland of what is today Moscow, and it's around it, which I think there's a lot of evidence for that. And it says, prophecy against him and say, thus says Adonai Elohim, the Lord God, I'm against you, Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. I will turn you about and put hooks into your jaws. And so some people see the hooks that are put into the jaws is this alliance with the Islamic world that is developing naturally since the fall of the Soviet Empire, where Russia seeks a new set of world to colonize in order to rebuild empire. Eastern Europe has been lost and a new base is sought. And we see early on that Putin chooses the Islamic world as the new base, and begins to connect itself to it because it gives it not only a base, but it also gives it global relevance. Suddenly, it wants to remain relevant globally. And so it has to kind of put its nose someplace that is globally relevant. And the struggle between the two main Abrahamic faiths and how this is important to hundreds of millions of people, billions of people around the world, naturally makes that area, very sensitive and global. And he begins to support the Islamic Republic's nuclear program and build in the province of Elam, which some people say there's a prophecy in Jeremiah about the bow of Elam being destroyed. It says that. So he begins to build that, and that becomes the beginning of the cooperation. Then it becomes also a military contract that Russia will support Iran if it's in a war. Oil for weapons becomes a very important part of the relationship, and it just keeps growing and expanding. And then we get this war with Ukraine, and suddenly Russia is isolated, and the Islamic Republic is one of its only friends. And so we are told that drones are given. We are told that this alliance is now multi-leveled. So Russia has a Security Council, and then Belarus comes, Russia's ally or another colony comes in to the Russian sphere of influence is forging, solidifying, and Iran is suddenly very much hooked into it, and it's the first country mentioned as the ally. And what we know from biblical prophecies, the first country mentioned is always the second most important nation in the war. It's the most important ally. The order of the other countries doesn't matter in the prophecy of the Bible, but the first country mentioned seems to be the one that's hooked into it. And so this connection between Russia and this new base of power, which happens to be Islamic, may be the very hook that God says, I will put hook into your jaws and bring it, because suddenly Russia is also involved in the aspirations of the world that it's trying to inspire and control.
So this war in Ukraine is going to expand. Very quickly, China recently brokered a deal. I don't know if we would call it a peace deal, but Saudi Arabia and Iran have been at loggerheads for decades, really since the Iranian Revolution. So we have the Shia in Iran battling for regional dominance against the Sunni in Saudi Arabia. Now China has stepped in, normally kind of a a role that the United States would have been taking the lead on. Now we have China brokering this deal. Now we're seeing perhaps cooperation with Saudi Arabia and Iran. Is there anything in
Yeah, it
Ezekiel?
solidifies the Islamic Republic in power, because it's been able to now negotiate something that brings stability to its power structure with Saudi Arabia, and the fact that it shows that, hey, China has a vested interest in this working, and signals again that China is also becoming more and more invested in the region. And so if you challenge these governments, in some ways you challenge Chinese interest. So it solidifies the Islamic Republic. And I want to kind of open up a little bit of each one of these countries that are involved, and kind of talk about what's actually happening inside of them, and why would they ever align together to form such a coalition and against Israel. But before we do that, since you're throwing out all these alliances and news items, here's another one that's interesting. It's from February 24th, 2022. That's when it was updated, but that's the day that Russia attacked Ukraine, February 24th, 2022. 2 days before, out of the blue, the representative of Russia in the United Nations made a surprise announcement that was like, where did this come from? Russia takes issue with Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. Now, just a quick backstory of how did Russia was not in Syria. And we don't know. General Soleimani, who was killed by Donald Trump, went to Putin. I don't know what he said to him, but after that, Putin decided he would enter Syria. Soleimani was very good at those types of negotiations. He said something to him that brought him. Officially, Russia said that there was a large number of Russian citizens from the Islamic states of Russia, because Russia has close to a 20% Islamic population. So 20% of Russian Federation proper is Islamic. Putin said that many people had joined ISIS, and that if Syria collapsed as a state and it became another heartland for terrorists like ISIS, that this would maybe affect Russia, because so many Russian citizens have actually joined ISIS. And he came to bring peace, goodwill, government, and order. This was his official statement. There may be, of course, truth to that, to bring stability in the region, to fill a void, perhaps, that Obama had created. But it also was after this meeting with Soleimani, and Russia comes into Syria, and Bashar Assad gives Russia a port on the Mediterranean. It's the port of Nablus, and Russia wants to maintain that port from the Soviet times, because you can't be a global power without a warm water port somewhere far from where you live. And it gives Russia that again, that idea of global relevance and power. And Russia then places its jets, it parks its jets in the mountains of Latakia, where Bashar Assad's family is from, and he's from, because he's from a minority in Syria. He's not a Sunni. And that kind of sends a message to all his enemies in Syria that the jets of Russia are parked at the door of the president. So, you decide what you want to do. It does bring stability to Syria, and perhaps does stop these groups from, expanding. And so Russia ends up controlling the air of Syria, and Iran the land. So basically, Syria has become completely taken over by the Russians and the Persians, the Iranians. The Persians control the land of Syria, including Lebanon, the country next door, and the Russians control the air of Syria. And so so suddenly, the ambassador gets up in the United Nations 2 days before the war and says Russia doesn't, and I'm quoting, Russia doesn't recognize Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights that are part of Syria. So it says, no, this is part of Syria. It has to be returned. Golan Heights is extremely strategic for Israel. Not only the waterway can be cut, the water to Israel, but also it's a high place from where you can shoot down easily. And it's not a piece of land you can get away until you have peace with your neighbor. And then...
And Israel took the Golan Heights during the Six-Day War in 1967.
Correct. And then it goes on by saying that it doesn't, Russia had said in 2017 that it recognized West Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. But in this communication, the Russian representative Polinsky appeared on Wednesday to ignore that recognition of Israel's government, using Tel Aviv as a synonym for Israel's government. It's a phrase used only by those countries who mean to convey that they do not recognize Israel's sovereignty over any part of its capital city, Jerusalem. So suddenly Russia backtracks on Jerusalem and takes the positions of the enemies of Israel 2 days before it attacks Ukraine, out of a surprise. No, I don't want to spread Russian phobia or anything like that. The Russian people are great people like anybody else. I'm just talking about this particular, moment in history and the alignment of powers. This is a spiritual war. There is a spiritual enemy that puts its hooks into human grievances and ambitions and twists it to try to, destroy a nation whose prophetic destiny is relevant to all of us, because it's really an attack against God's plans to bring this messianic kingdom and this utopia. If Satan can destroy Israel, then these prophecies break and the word of God breaks and the age of empire continues, because God says in the Bible that he does nothing except that which he reveals through his servants, the prophets. So if you break this picture, then what God has revealed through the servants, the prophets, can happen. And God says he doesn't do anything other than that which he reveals. So this is a spiritual battle. It's got nothing to do with the Russians or the Iranians or the other countries involved.
They're being used. They're being manipulated.
They're being used. And it's a moment in history of certain powers that are in their governments.
So this battle, again, we're not talking about Armageddon. We're not even necessarily talking about World War III. World War III may, in fact, be Armageddon. Right. But in this conflict, it does sound as based on Zechariah, I think, and also Ezekiel, that there will be perhaps nuclear weapons used.
I think so. I think that it does point to the fact that there is nukes coming, and we know that there's light nukes, and that is another thing that became, everyone had forgotten about nukes, and suddenly we're all talking about them again. And the United Nations head is saying, the scepter of nuclear war, once seen so distant, is upon us again. And Putin is showing his nukes and leaving treaties of disarmament. And so there could be nukes coming. Where are they actually going to get used in this war? In Zechariah, definitely, it seems that there's use of these actually there. I would say that God is the one that pulverizes the enemies. In this case, they come, and how much of the weapons are used, I don't know. But it definitely does say that God will defeat them. He will be the one that I will send fire. God says, he uses the personal, I will send fire on Magog and on those who live securely in the islands. Then they will know that I am Adonai, so I will make my holy name known among my people Israel. I will not let my holy name be profane anymore. The nations will know that I am the Lord, the Holy One of Israel. Behold, it is coming. So God says in verse 3 of chapter 39, then I will strike your bow and from your left hand and make your arrows drop from your right hand. You will fall in the mountains of Israel, you and all your troops and the people that are with you. I will give you as food to all kinds of birds of prey and the beasts of the field. You will fall upon this. So this idea of, is God literally going to use his angels? Like Michael, we are told, is the one that guards Israel. Is God going to command Michael and say, okay, engage, or, so to speak? In other passages, it says, I will punish him with pestilence and blood. I will pour out rain on him and on his troops, on the many peoples with them, a torrential rain with hailstones, fire and brimstone. So does God weaponize the natural ecosystem against this enemy? Is this an angelic victory for Israel? Is this how God is glorified? Is it a miraculous victory? And the people of Israel go, wow, they turn, they have a faith a huge spiritual awakening, because it does seem to suggest
Well,
that
that was
that
my next question, and that is, whether or not nuclear weapons are involved. It sounds like it's going to be a horrific war. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has already inflicted massive casualties on both sides. It's been horrific already. Why would God allow such a thing? What's the purpose of all this?
I think that it is, first of all, God is extracting a great evil from the earth. Sometimes when you look at kind of um, it's something that God controls. He brings them, he defeats them. First of all, it's limited in scope. It doesn't get out of hand. God is going ahead of us and saying, when you see all this, don't be afraid. I am in control of it. Then I think that he's extracting an evil. If you look at the history of the past 1400 years of the rise of the caliphate and all of that, there are a few things that have happened, two things in particular that have happened that have challenged it, and yet they've never been. One of them, of course, was when Napoleon came to fight the British in Egypt and inadvertently introduced the idea of democracy to the Islamic world, that led to the secular rise of all of these eventually secular kings, like the father of Assad and Nasser of Egypt, and then in the 6 Day War under a kind of a socialist secular banner. But ultimately, nothing has been able to slow down the warriors who believe that their faith should reign supreme. One of the only unique things in the history of Islam that doesn't just follow a pattern of preaching and conquering and growing and expanding and building Islamic civilization, is the return of the Jewish people. It's actually interrupted the history of Islam. In the past 1400 years, it's a unique event in the entire history of the Muslim world. So it's interesting that God may use this to remove from that region of the world something that no people, no king, no one has ever been able to remove from that region, which is the spirit of the Islamic holy warriors. Each, whether it's the Salafis of Arabia with ISIS, the Muslim Brotherhood of Egypt, or the Islamic Revolution of Iran, they each have a dream of the universalism of the faith and of an Islamic world, which is not a new dream, but it is a dream that the people of that region have never been able to completely undo. You don't have a choice. If it rises, it kind of invites you to really be subject to it, like it happened in the 1979 revolution in Iran, or the Taliban taking over Afghanistan. But Israel is suddenly back, and God may use Israel to draw all of these warriors out. And once they try and they fail, they have a theological awakening. They have a spiritual awakening. They kind of go, wait a second, how could we be lost? Wait, could God be with Israel then? So God wasn't with us after all. And this produces massive spiritual awakening in the hearts and minds of many of these warriors, who frankly are people who have never had access to this other perspective or this other book or this other God, but who have faith, who are people of faith. And so suddenly they kind of go, wait, what's going on here? And so when God says, I will put my glory among the nations as a result of this moment, all the nations will see my judgment that I will execute in my hand, that I will lay on them. The house of Israel will know that I am the Lord their God from that day onward. So there's kind of awakening. The nations will know that the house of Israel went into exile for their iniquity because they broke faith with me. So I hid my face from them and gave them into the hand of their enemies. All of them fell by the sword. I dealt with them according to their uncleanness and their transgression. I hid my face from them. Therefore, thus says the Lord, now I will restore Jacob from exile. I will compassion on the whole house of Israel. I will be zealous for my holy name. So they will. So the idea is that there's an awareness among the Jewish people. There's a spiritual revival. We know that a lot of people coming from the Europe and America are secular, and they don't really see themselves in the context of the stories of this book. They may have a spiritual awakening as a result of this. The enemies that God is glorified in the eyes of the enemies. And I think they were going to realize, wow, God is with Israel. Look at this miraculous victory we just experienced, that we were on the wrong side of it. And so that changes the fabric of the Middle East. And then you can see, for instance, Iran, which is a very important country in the Middle East and is a trend-setting country. Already there's a revolutionary spirit that has started that's maybe like growth, that pushes like a snake that changes skin. Something is pushing already in the hope of replacing the theocracy that's there. So we could see this as the event that gathers this spirit of war and of hate and of this is our way is the true way and we are the righteous of the earth, and brings this plague in a way that the people of the region haven't been able to get rid of, even though the people who believe in such things, they think they're doing everyone a favor. That's how they see it. But regardless of who's right or wrong, if this story is true, they all may gather under their industrial patron and follow him into all of this, and their defeat might change the heart and usher in a new age. So I think that after this, if this is not the War of Armageddon and there's a gap, then I would say that the world that rises after this in the Middle East is actually going to be a time of restoration, of peace, of spiritual awakening, of other opinions and ideas being allowed in there. It is the defeat of the whole jihadi thing that's what we've been struggling with for decades now in our time. This is it. It's done away with. Even the Muslims, like the Abraham Accord, there'll be a massive change. It's a defeat of an entire ideology and ambition, and the removal of something dark, and the ushering in of a far more enlightened age in that region, and the glorification of God in the hearts and minds of many who will go, wow, this is, they'll connect to this, they'll connect to the God. So God is bringing people to a place where he can bless them, redeem them, and invite them into his blessings for them. On the scale of the other nations, I think people will say, oh, we need peace. This has got to stop. This battle, look where he got us. And so I think that this will actually might start the process to take us to a very important covenant that Israel signs with all of its, so-called enemies. Now even the Iranians, everybody has now tried and failed. Everybody, there's no one left. The Arab tried. Now the larger forces have tried. It's time for everyone, as these countries have changes inside of themselves, as their governments fall as a result of this defeat, the new ones emerging, yes, will be invited to make peace. And now what will happen to the two main players, Russia and Iran? Well, if the Islamic Republic has this ambition, that's one of its raison d'etre. It's one of this ethos is to bring justice to the Middle East and the world, and part of it is defeating Israel. That's how they define their theocracy. It's part of the rules of their government and constitution and religion. So if that is now gone, and Persia goes back to being a player in the world system, it falls into place in the world system. You look at the Parliament of Iran today. If you Google the Parliament of Iran, it's a pyramid with, I think, 33 windows. That's what the Parliament of Iran is today. And so it kind of falls into the world system. And Russia, this may be what maybe this is the end of Putin, this war, if he's in fact God.
Right. But as you say, this may usher in a period of peace and stability, a new age, not the final age, but a gap between and a prelude to yet another conflict, which is Armageddon, perhaps World War III.
Three levels to it. In the Middle East, I think it brings a reprieve there. On the world system, Russia may finally be brought into the fold after this. Maybe Putin leaves and Russia comes in the fold, because Russia bears the sign of the eagle and is the eastern part of the Roman Empire. And the eagles from Moscow to DC through Europe may actually form a coalition, and they tap into the ancient Persian Empire, because Iran becomes part of that world, and the Sunni nations are already connected to these powers. So now we may get the next world order rising. A new world order may arise, the 10 kings, which are of a different prophecy. And the third event would be the economic dimension of this. Such a war, if this does happen, in the 20s, if we are in the decade of this war, already the system in the West is not able to stabilize, and we don't know if it's going to stabilize. We could have an economic collapse. They might not be able to control this interest rate inflation game that they're playing, and that might bring in kind of some economic hardship, and then this war, such a war like this would really like exasperate it, and such a thing, it would affect the world's economy in such a way that it would be that economic reality would be huge fuel for the rising of a new world order. So there'd be a massive political change, massive economic changes that give birth maybe to what will be the final world order that eventually chooses an emperor, which is the Antichrist. So there's a change that will happen on the scale of the world order. There's a spiritual awakening that will happen to the people of God on both sides of the fence, who will see more, wow, this is the time of our redemption. This is the end of it. And I think it will change the political face of the Middle East. So it's going to be a very important piece of the puzzle. Something that was meant to defeat God's plans, of course, moves it forward, but then they reorganize under a final structure to try yet again. And then they fail because the Messiah arrives.
Very long, arduous labor pains taking us into...
And this is just theories, by the way. This is just for fun. We're just intellectually, these are just conjectures. I want everyone to be clear on that. This is not like, thus the Lord said or anything. We're going to find out. Let's see. Let's discover it together as it unfolds.
Ali Siadatan, Think Again Productions, thinkagainproductions.com. You can contact him through the website, get details on his upcoming trip to Israel, first week of December of 2023. I sincerely hope to be a part of that. Hope to see you there. And the series on Revelation, you can go to the patreon.com/Think Again Productions, patreon.com/Think Again Productions to sign up for that.
Absolutely.
Ali, thank you so much.
Yes. And if you want to see the first part of this Ezekiel thing, go to my YouTube channel, go to the website, thinkagainproductions.com, double-click on the documentary, and on the YouTube channel, you'll see a detailed explanation of this war with maps and all of that. That'll give you kind of a foundation into it, if you wish.
Fantastic.
A new Richard Syrett's Strange Planet drops every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Subscribe at strangeplanetpodcast.com.